Thank you. Thank you,
Thank
Sister
you.
Jennifer.
All right, Brother Gibbs. Um, we have everyone out of the waiting room, and it's all on you, sir.
All right. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Sister Jennifer. I really appreciate it. Good evening, brothers and sisters. My name is C.R. Gibbs. Our topic tonight is Kingdoms of Gold and Glory, and I'm talking about Nubia, Kush, and Axum. Now, let's take a look at this image I have in front of you so that we can get a sense of where we are. My geography tonight will encompass both the Horn of Africa and the Nile Valley. So what we're looking at then is Nubia. That's first, chronologically. Nubia emerged in the Upper Nile Valley probably about 3500 BC or so. Egyptian traders went to Nubia in search of gold, ivory, incense, cattle, animal skins, and slaves. Nubians were recruited to serve as mercenaries in the Egyptian forces. While it was basically an agricultural country, growing most of the same crops and raising the same domesticated animals as in Kemet or Egypt, unlike Egypt, though, the floodplain for Nubia was not as wide. Therefore, Nubian farmers had to make more use of irrigation networks to water their fields. Now, the Nubians were heavily influenced by Kemetic or Egyptian culture, in part because of their close proximity to the land of the pharaohs. For example, the Nubians built Egyptian type pyramids and palaces. They also worshiped some of the Egyptian gods and adopted Kemetic or Egyptian burial practices. However, the Nubians retained many of their own gods as well. Likewise, the Nubians used Egyptian hieroglyphics in writing, but they also developed their own script, which was alphabetic. Nubia lasted for nearly 1,000 years before falling into decline, only to reemerge as the kingdom of Kush around 2500 BC. So we'll be examining the rise and fall of illustrious African kingdoms and the extraordinary impact that Axum had on Eastern Africa and, in fact, that entire part of the world. So let us get going. Again, you have a timeline on the left. You have an orientation in the middle, and then you have a little more geography and chronology on the right-hand side. For years, traditional Egyptologists tried to teach you that the people of Nubia and the people of Kemet or Egypt had very little in common, that they came from separate stocks, while African-centered historians knew that that was not true. They had studied things long enough and most intensely enough to understand that out of the Nile Valley, these Africans came of the same strains. And so it is almost humorous, if it wasn't so ironic, that now, almost in this century, they now recognize what other scholars, African centered scholars, have been telling us for years, that burial sites show how Nubians, Egyptians integrated communities thousands of years ago in the Nile Valley river area. They were not strangers to one another. For how could they be if you apply just a modicum of common sense? But it has taken them years to catch up with people like John G. Jackson and W.B. Du Bois and so many others. So we are extremely happy that they decided to catch up, but we also need for you to know that there are some things that must be considered. For example, in the daily life of the Nubians, R.S. Bianchi, in an article called Meroitic Architectural Mathematics, he makes this note. He says there is virtually no mention of Nubia's scientific achievements in either the inscriptions or literary traditions as preserved to this day. Their success in either or other fields of endeavor is passed over in silence as well as in these same records. And yet, a survey of their rich material and their culture, throughout which the ages suggest that the Nubian culture possessed scientific knowledge and that the elite placed great understanding in their daily lives and placed the knowledge at their disposal and into the hands of their craftsmen. So again, we find that no, they were not strangers to one another. They borrowed from each other and on occasion fought each other. This is one of the places where they met. This is a magical place. This is how can we say that? This is the meeting place, if you will, for Kemet and in Kemet, and it's for the Kushites. And here, where these great peoples met, they were not held back by pre-cooked notions of friends and enemies. In fact, the splendor that I hereby refer to, that the scholar Bianchi talks about in the daily life of the Nubians, can plainly be seen here. It is an extraordinary place, and we're talking about Aswan. We're talking about Aswan. I know that when I saw it initially many years ago, it seemed as though it meant to speak to me. And so we looked at, we sailed along the Nile, we saw the tombs. In one of the other lectures I do on a gentleman named Harkuf, one of the first of the great uh, Egyptian explorers, his tomb graces one of these hills. A moment ago, I mentioned Aswan. It is a boundary, but it's also, if you will, a time clock, in that as you look at the inscriptions on what the late, great Dr. Ben called Essowan, water and stone, this elephantine island, which therefore bore marks of inner Africa as well as the coast of Africa, is a record of the encounters, almost timeless, of these African nations and societies. This was found on the island of Elephantine. Stela of Senusret III from Elephantine, below the king's names and titles, is an inscription recording building work at the fortress of Elephantine, in which the king ordered to be done at the time of a military expedition against Kush. So, as I said to you again, these were people, African peoples, who borrowed from one another, but at the same time fought with one another. It is a not so puzzling, but like any relationship you have with long friends, sometimes you get along and sometimes you don't. But the rest of the world, those outside Africa, could not seem to fathom that you could have advanced cultures this early. Remember, I said that when we're talking about Nubia, Nubia comes online in the Upper Nile probably about 3,500 BCE, before the Common Era. And there's plenty of evidence of gold and ivory and incense and cattle and animal skins and people who were captured. their reputation was so great that the Nubians already had reputations as fine soldiers sought after the people, the pharaohs of Kemet or Egypt. But the story has been, and we saw a bit of that the other night, and we'll see it again for those of you who saw the Ten Commandments. And in the Great Parade of Nations, they show black folk, and you have, if you've seen the film with Charlton Heston, in the Parade of Nations, you have a wonderful sister uh, dressed down with feathers and so forth. The great Woody Strode, legendary black actor in Hollywood, is in that scene. And they even have the nerve to have the Queen of Nubia sort of give a side glance to Charlton Heston, who of course plays a European Egyptian, which is, that's not a contradiction in terms, at least at this period. I don't know what is. But the science coupled with the splendor that they saw of this ancient kingdom, again, I'm referring to Nubia, stunned, puzzled, and angered many European Egyptologists. So one of the times you take out your pen or your pencil or jot it down somewhere, because I want to share with you a statement by a European Egyptologist. Today, they would have you believe these people did not bring their biases, did not hew to their own prejudices when they looked at magnificence, gold, and glory from what they knew in their heart of hearts of black folk. Arthur Weigel, in his book, Flights into Antiquity, written in the mid 1920s, can't even seem to understand how these black people could rise to so high a level and at the same time be splendid in their science. And so he says on page 222, quote, that astonishing epoch of nigger domination. That's actually, for those of you taking notes, that's page 222. And again, that's Arthur Weigel, Weigall, chapter 24. It's actually page 221 and 222 under exploits of a nigger king. And he can't process that black people could feel this way about themselves, could do the things that they do, could set in motion a long-standing African kingdom that would, after a time, be supplanted by yet another glorious African kingdom. And of course, I'm referring to Kush, which came in after Nubia. And again, people were astounded that even that history would take note of these black people. But all around them, all around this meeting place, the Elephantine Island and the Nile River, etchings reflect a changing climate. The elephant, an earlier wetter one, the camel, a later drier one. And if we look closer at these etchings, they give us clues to first the Nubian people and then to the people that follow them in roughly the same place. We're talking about the Kushites. We see that their love of horses, that their militaristic side with the practice of edge weapons, and even a game that uh, looks sort of like tennis or paddleball. But we know we're in Africa because if we go to the illustration on the middle line on the far right, we see a giraffe. Okay. If we go down to the lower left, we see the Nubians' great love of conviviality. They love to speak, they love to exchange ideas. And in this ancient drawing, one Nubian has thrown his arm over the back of his chair. He's having a good conversation. He's having a good conversation. And if I didn't mention, and of course I hadn't, not quite yet, is how rich these people were, these kindred people, so that we see the distribution of stones, minerals, and metals from the land that would be part of Nubia first and then Kush later. Things that we associate only with ancient Egypt, limestone, basalt, we also sandstone, gold, 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 place after place, gold. And there are ancient scholars who believe that Nubia name was perhaps based on the ancient Egyptian word for gold, which was nub. Okay. We know that these Africans took their work seriously. This is the unfinished obelisk. And it was unfinished because they abandoned it and left it where it was because it was a crack in it. If any of you work for the government, you may be familiar with a policy and a practice called total quality management. In other words, you do the best you can all the time, whenever you can. There is no substitute. And so this is what happened. And Folky, we even see how the inspectors walked up the steps to look closely at this crack. And you know what an obelisk is because we have one in Washington, D.C. Okay. But this land of the Nile was rich. And we already mentioned gold. I've already mentioned a number of other substances. But here we have the not only gold, we have African blackwood. We have, as we move from left to right, and those big chunks on the platter, what you see, no, that's not food. Again, those are gold nuggets, again, signifying the richness of Nubia, the richness of Kush in terms of gold. Now, if you look at what else they're holding, we're looking at animal skins, and furs or other types of animal skin. Let's not forget the gold rings, because in later times, during the times of the Kushites, as the Greeks and Romans come into contact with this, these marvelous stories will spring up, and they'll say that the Kushites rode around in crystal palaces and used gold as chains, all these things. And of course, this doesn't seem to get to uh, the schools, and our children are not learning that 100 years ago, or indeed even today. Or again, as I mentioned in The Daily Life of the Nubians by R.S. Bianchi, there is virtually no mention of Nubia's scientific achievements in either the inscriptions or literary traditions as preserved to this day. Their success in other fields of endeavor is passed over in silence as well as in the same records. And yet, a survey of their rich material culture throughout the ages suggests that the Nubians possessed scientific knowledge that the elite placed at their disposal and placed into the hands of their craftsmen. Many of the people that come out of Nubia, the children of Nubia and Kush, sit on the seats of the pharaohs. And here is one example for your perusal. Okay, this is the man that we believe is the first great leader of a united Kemet. His name is Narmer or Menes, which may be a title as well, for Menes means the establisher. But you can look at his face and know that's a brother. So Narmer, check him out, Narmer. We find that his suede traveled widely. This was discovered in 1994. The object above is a rare ceramic sherd or peace, if you will, showing the Serek sign of King Narmer, and is believed to be a fragment of a wine jar which was imported from the Nile Valley to Israel about 4 or 5,000 years ago. So we're looking at a period called pre-dynastic. We're looking at a period called pre-dynastic. And while the historical record of ancient Egypt is as rich and exotic as anything on earth, relatively little is known about the pre-dynastic period that ended in about 3110 BC, when King Narmer unified Upper and Lower Egypt and formed the Old Kingdom of Egypt. All along the banks of the Nile, they built great palaces and temples. I myself have been to Edfu, and it still retains a fascinating, in fact, an arresting majesty that I encourage you to see for yourself, so you don't have to take Brother Gibbs's word for it. At this temple of Horus at Edfu, you're also going to see references to how the greatest of Egypt came out of the south, from the very land that would give us Kush, the very land that would give us the growing grounds for these great African kingdoms. So that when we talk about Kush or when we talk about Nubia, you understand that we're letting free the information to share with you about these ancient kingdoms of gold and glory, and how, according to them, the earliest examples of those timeless ideas and practices that would give rise to ancient Kemet came out of the South, from inner Africa. Now, of course, this is trying to have it some ways, both ways, but it's important that you understand that the building blocks of the great kingdom, world's first great nation state, come out of first Nubia and then Kemet. Kingdoms that people wished mightily could have been the basis for the splendor that they found in Europe, but each time it comes further and further back to Egypt and to Africa. Now, we've talked a bit about Kush, so that you understand that Kush established some political and cultural independence by about 1,000 years before the birth of Christ. Kush even conquered Egypt briefly before they themselves were overthrown by the Assyrians in 663 BCE. But even without the control of Kemet or Egypt, however, Kush became an important kingdom economically, trading with the Roman Empire, India, and Arabia. Kushites exported captives and slaves, as well as ivory, gold, and cattle. The Kushites mined iron ore, from which they made tools and weapons in furnaces fueled by timber. The city of Meroe was a particularly important trade center. Kush enjoyed its greatest power from about 300 before the Common Era to 100 years in the Christian era. Afterward, their power and influence declined, partly because of deforestation. The Kushites cut down trees in order to make the charcoal used in smelting iron. And in 340, in the Christian era, Kush was conquered by the African civilization of Axum. But we're not yet done with the splendors of Kush and Nubia. Perhaps this will help you. When we look at this schematic, we see that there were times when the control of ancient Kemet was in the hands of the indigenous people, that is to say, the Nubians, in times when it was in the hands of the people of Kemet. And so it went back that way. I don't care how many Hollywood movies you saw, whether you saw the Egyptians with Joan Collins and Jack Hawkins, or the times that you may have seen the Ten Commandments with Charlton Heston, which once again will be coming up with its miseducation, probably around Easter on your local television station. But understand that we're talking about rich, powerful African kingdoms. The Egyptians themselves had to build structures like these on the border between Egypt and Kush or Nubia. This, however, when I look at it, perhaps it'll strike you this way as well, looks like some sort of European castle from the days of King Arthur. And you have crenellated towers. Those are the towers with the little teeth on them. You have what appears to be a moat, and you have soldiers marching out of the front part of the structure. Most of this we would lose when much of the Nile Valley was flooded. That's a story for another time. Here's a picture of some of what remained. They called it the Nubian Rescue Campaign, with the excavation and recording of the Middle Kingdom fortress at Buhin, one of the names of the forts that guarded the border between Kemet and Kush, okay, which is now lost between Lake Nasser. But this is what some of the wall structure and the moat structure looked like. Here's a larger view where we have these fortresses along the boundary between Kemet and Kush. Notice, if you will, those same crenellated towers. The walls, rather the windows, were constructed in such a way that if you were firing arrows, you could fire three ways: forward, to the left, and to the right. And if just for a second you bought the idea that the Nubians, as portrayed by Hollywood, were nothing but slaves, you would not need to have a series of fortresses like these along the border if that was the case. Just move in and go in anytime you want. So when you watch, again, Ben-Hur or the Egyptians bear these fortresses that help to control, keep peace on the border in mind. King Djerd stood proud upon the Nubian shore. One enemy chief trussed up before him, another tied ignominiously to the prow of his boat. The bodies of the fallen strewn about. In a series of battles, they had defeated the Bow people, another name for the Nubians, because we were experts at shooting bows and arrows. Now his scribes were counting the booty, cattle, and people taken captive. Soon his proud warrior sailors would be rowing briskly with the current, running downriver toward the two lands to enjoy the fruits of their victory and the adulation of the people as they passed northward. Inscription on a rock drawing from King Djerd about 3,000 years before the birth of Christ. By the time of King Tutankhamun, the traditional battles for power portrayed in this fashion, with the Nubians or Kushites being shown as the darker skinned folk. But if you look closely, you'll see cornrows in the house on both sides. The leadership, as I said earlier, is often of Nubian or Kushite heritage. And we see this in the family of King Tutankhamun and his forebears. So this is a bust of King Tut on the left-hand side. Okay. Queen T, believed to be his grandmama, on the right-hand side. And in the center bottom We also have this man you should know very well, for he attempted to bring about a sea change in the worship pattern of this part of the Nile Valley. Of course, I'm talking about Akhenaten, who would change the focus from the gods of his ancestors to a new god. In fact, he would call him Aten. Okay, here we go. Some people claim they couldn't find illustrations like these, where one of the Kushite beauties, a royal Kushite beauty, is having her hair dressed by servants. One of my favorites. This is a limestone stela about 2250 to 2035 BC, depicting the Nubian soldier Nenu with his Egyptian wife, his beloved Sikat Hor. He holds a bow and a quiver, arrows upright before him. A distinctively Nubian narrow leather beaded sash hangs down to the front of his kilt. Nenu's son is dressed like his father, but with a long black hairpin in his hair. Sikat Hor wears the same close fitting straight linen dress and broad collar typically worn by Egyptian women. The girl to the right of Nenu's son is probably his daughter. She too is dressed Nubian style with a skirt and uncovered upper torso. A servant presents a bowl of beer, most likely taken from the jug of beer on the table. The two dogs are probably family pets. The Egyptian hieroglyphics at the top and side of the stela are a prayer to Anubis, the patron deity of embalmers. For Nenu's friends and relatives, the stela marked the family's burial site and the place where they could leave offerings of food, drinks, or prayer. As depicted by the people of the Nile Valley, the Nubians were not only fine archers, but we see evidence of this again in this grouping of Kushite archers. If you look closely, you'll see they're holding arrows in their hands. And if you look closer still, you will see their bows. The bowstrings appear to be missing, but everything else is there. And I've already mentioned to you that these Nubians and the Kushites before them were sought after soldiers because they were skillful and brave. Keeping good relations between the people of Kemet and the Nubians, and then after them, the Kushites, was extremely important. And so this Egypt, or Kemet, regularly sent emissaries, if you will, to make sure that things were going well. And this is a depiction of some of the graceful, large, impressive vessels that they sent down to meet with the Nubians. Let's take a look at the bottom vessel, because if you look closely in the bow of the boat, you'll also see that there are small spaces for horses. I'll give you a moment. The Nubians are depicted with the feathers, but if you look beneath where they are sitting, so they're showing themselves sitting on the top of the vessel, but underneath them, you can see stalls for horses. Okay. So that, again, in Nubia, find evidence of the world's oldest monarchy, the world's oldest system of government, employing a king and queen. We've been taught that the minute we say the word king or queen, we probably are looking at King Charles or Lady Di or someone like that. But to find that there are clues to the oldest monarchy coming to us from Mother Africa, well, that might surprise some of you. And again, this is from an article that appeared in the New York Times by Boyce Rinsberger. It's still available if you search for it online. Evidence of the oldest recognizable monarchy in human history, preceding the rise of the earliest Egyptian kings by several generations, has been discovered in artifacts from ancient Nubia in Africa. The discovery is expected to stimulate a new appraisal of the origins of civilization in Africa, raising the questions of to what extent later Egyptian culture may have derived its advanced political structure from the Nubians. The various symbols of Nubian royalty that have been found are the same as those associated in later times with Egyptian kings. The findings suggest that the ancient Nubians may have reached a stage of political development as long ago as 3,300 years before the birth of Christ, several generations before the earliest documented Egyptian king. This discovery is based on a study of artifacts from ancient tombs excavated 15 years ago. And this article is about from 1979 or so. But understand what you're looking at. Understand just in this example of leadership, how these African states have influenced the leadership styles of the rest of Europe. Again, things that our children don't know. And if we're looking at some of the places in, for example, Nubia, it was in 2013 that in the ancient city of Meroe in the kingdom of Kush, archaeologists have uncovered a relief of a smiling, carefully adorned woman. Indication of a slight double chin suggests that she carried a little bit of extra weight, which is how royal women from Kush were often depicted. She could even be a queen or a princess, according to researchers, but determining that will require more study of the fragile palace where she was found. So we did not need to wait in darkness or ignorance for anyone. We had our own systems of government. You will find them as you come to study deeper into the political systems, the culture of our ancestors. These are princes from Nubia visiting the kings of Egypt. Here is one of these abundant sisters, a Nubian queen sitting on her lion throne and receiving funerary offerings from several gods and goddesses, for according to some sources, from priests representing the gods. So when you see, for example, that extraordinary sister on your left-hand side, when you look at the writing, when you look at the depictions, you see a certain pride reflected, a certain skill, perhaps indeed even showmanship. This is one example that I do want to share with you. This limestone relief was found in a funeral chapel of the Kushite queen Shemana Dakate, who reigned during the 2nd century before Christ. She was the first queen to personally exercise power in the capital city of Meroe and is believed to have left the throne to a son. The prince depicted in the relief, although the Meroitic culture had developed its own distinctive customs, such as its own script and powerful women rulers, the style of the carving and the presence of the Egyptian god Osiris, Thoth, and Isis point to a strong influence from Egypt. Adopting an Egyptian title used by the pharaohs, Shenanadakete styled herself Lord of the Two Lands. The relief, constructed from a total of 51 blocks, formed the south wall of her steep-sided pyramid in Meroe's North Cemetery. So let's start on the right-hand side and work our way from right to left, following the numbers. Okay. Um, Let's try number 5, and then look down and you'll begin to perceive a human figure. Okay, you begin to perceive a human figure. A prince rests on a footstool. Below him are more young people, perhaps the queen's children. The goddess Isis spreads her, and on the next one to the right, she spreads her protective wings to bless both Queen Shenanigahete and her family. If we move very quickly over to number 1, all the way in the extreme left-hand side, we'll see rows of high-ranking officials bringing offering, parading before the gods and the queen, Shenanigahete. Next to that, in number 2, a large table is loaded with offerings of food and drink to lay before Osiris, the god of the underworld. Next to that, number 3, tables are laid out in an offering before Thoth, the god of writing, who served as the scribe of the underworld. And then again, back to 4, Queen Shenanigahete presides over the scene. Under her throne lie bound prisoners in the thrall of her power. Take your time and see if you need to trace with your finger the outline of what you're looking at. But we can sum it up with God bless the queen. God bless the sister in the house who is in charge. Merowe, the one of the capitals, is known to have had powerful Black women, strong queens. In his geography, the Greek historian Strabo wrote of a queen called Candace, who signed a peace treaty with the Emperor Augustus. Candace, in fact, means sister and was the title given to Kushite queens. There were many queens in Merowe, such as Amenerinus, the Candace that Strabo was referring to, and her successor, Amanishakheto, whose treasure was looted in 1834. Archaeologists have recently been studying the funerary chamber of another queen, Kinua, whose tomb was excavated by George Reisner in 1922. So please understand that the long life of these kingdoms is remarkable. We might say remarkable in the fact that more people don't know that we were powerful and fine, not always conflict free, but we had our own history. We had our own history, and it did make its way known in a few places. Let me take you now to the passage in the 8th century BC. In the 18th chapter of his writing, the Jewish prophet Isaiah wrote the following words, quote, "The land of wearing wings, which lies along the rivers of Kush, which sends envoys by sea, even in papyrus vessels on the surface of the waters. Go, swift messengers, to a people tall and smooth-skinned, to a people feared far and wide, an aggressive nation of strange speech, whose land is divided by rivers." As far back as those days, they were known to the people who were writing the Hebrew Bible, the Jewish prophet Isaiah. Now, if you want, I would recommend that you, again, look it up. Okay, the 18th chapter, all right, of Isaiah, and try the NIV version. Nothing wrong with the KJV version, but try the NIV version as well. The people of the Nile Valley, in terms of the Cushites, the Nubians, left behind records of what they did. I previously referred that to you, but they left their own pyramids. In fact, more pyramids south of the boundary between Egypt and Kush or Nubia than you're going to find in ancient Egypt itself. Probably about perhaps 300 pyramids south of that. The oldest tombs, for example, in the city of Merowe, Okay. We see, and they were dedicated to the gods Isis and Amun. Herodotus, the great Greek historian, the man who I was taught was called the father of history, and the city's position on the trade route linking the Red Sea and the Nile fused Meroe's reputation as an almost mythical city of wealth. Although the Meroitic language has yet to be deciphered, archaeologists know Meroe was a center of gold working and iron smelting. This Meroe occupied 1 square mile and consisted of palaces and rectangular mud buildings overlooking fertile fields. Indeed. One of the locations of the Meroitic cemeteries is the West Cemetery of Meroe. And this is what you have. So in many cases, these pyramidal objects, again, not as large as those that we might find in ancient Kemet, but more numerous and of more recent vintage, give us, for those who have clawed their way inside, those who have stolen the rich contents of these tombs, that these were a people rich and powerful. This is the Lion Temple of Naka, and here we observe a two-pronged, if you will, description of glory. For we have on the left-hand side, the king could be not a comedy. On the right-hand side, we have one of the Meroitic Kushite queens. Notice, if you will, that her arm is raised with a sword. This sister is ready to take care of business. She is an ample sister and shown in perfect equality with her husband on the other side of the pylon. Let's see if this helps you a bit. So that the prisoners are shown held by the hair by the queen, and in her right hand, raised above their heads, is her sword. So she is ready to dispatch them at her will. This may help you further. A black queen of ancient Sudan, possibly a descendant of Candace, whose name often adopted by later Sudanese queens, memory of her glorious resistance. This is some of the jewelry that was found inside some of the Kushite pyramids. The jewelry and other objects which Giuseppe Ferlini recovered from the burial of Queen Amana are divided between the collections of the Antiquities Museums of Munich and Berlin, with the former having the greater share, representing the pieces purchased from Ferlini by Mad Ludwig of Bavaria. From the top left, a shield ring with carnelian and fused glass inlays. Rather than worn as a finger ring, these were more likely affixed to a diadem at the brow, on the forehead. To the left, a shoulder ornament in the form of the god Wepawet. Yeah, if you look at it, it's in Munich now. Above, an armlet with fused glass inlays. Top right, 3 Hathor-headed elements with fused glass inlays from a brace. Berlin. Right bottom, a bracelet of Wajet eyes inlaid with fused glass. To the top left, below, armlet with fused glass inlays and winged figures of the goddess Mut. Below that, a signet ring with the royal family. Below that, right so-called shield ring with fused glass inlays, depicted as lion-headed god Apedemet, who was, if you pardon the expression, bigger among the Kushites and the others in the Nile Valley, the Kushites and the Nubians. On occasion, The jewels of these rich African states will be displayed in modern times and have been displayed. It was only a few years ago that this exhibition was displayed in the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston and traveled to the Getty Villa Museum. The Nubia and Kush did not escape the notice of several of our greatest historians. W.E.B. Du Bois, in his book Negro, wrote in 1915, under the generic name Ethiopia, was considerable throughout the world. Pseudo-Callisthenes was an evidently fabulous story of the visit of Alexander the Great to Candace, Queen of Meroe, which nevertheless illustrates her fame. Candace will not let him enter Ethiopia and says he is not to scorn her people because they are black, for they are whiter in soul than his white folk. She sent Alexander gold, maidens, parrots, sphinxes, and a crown of emeralds and pearls. Du Bois tells us that she ruled 80 tribes, ready to punish those who attacked her. Again, this is from W.E.B. Du Bois's The Negro. So time and again, we find, if we know where to look, we find evidence of splendid African kingdoms as we look just in the Horn of Africa and in the Nile Valley regions. From Before Color Prejudice, The Ancient View of Blacks by Frank Snowden, the services of Ethiopian warriors undoubtedly won the gratitude of others for whose causes they fought in various parts of the Mediterranean world. The 25th dynasty was not only known among the contemporaries, but his also accomplishments were considered worthy of note and admiration by later chroniclers. The requests of Baal of Tyre and Hezekiah of Judah for Napatan assistance illustrate Asiatic awareness of the dynasty's influence. The Book of Nahum recalled the glory of the Napatan kingdom long after its fall at the hands of the Assyrians. That Taharka was still regarded as a great military leader 600 years after his death is evident from Strabo's list of famed world conquerors. And I might say that the quote I read to you from Isaiah is not the first of such quote from a known chronicler of those days, but it is worthy of being told to you so that you can again assess the renown that these kingdoms of gold and glory possessed in their day. Du Bois from The World in Africa, The World in Africa. Quote, Taharka, another king of the Kushites, ascended the throne in 688 BC. At the age of about 42, for 15 years, he fostered the economic, cultural, and religious life of Ethiopia and Egypt. The trade of the country increased, and there was enough money to repair the ancient temples and build new ones. Taharka established friendly alliances with Western Asia and with Assyria. The Hebrew Bible chronicles this in the downfall of Sennacherib and notes Ethiopia's trade. Taharka's building at Karnak was planned as one of the most striking in the ancient world. The temple built at Thebes had a relief representing the four corners, representing the four corners of the four quarters of the Nilotic world. Dedun, the great god of Ethiopia, representing the south. Soped, the eastern desert. Sedek, the western desert. And Horus, the north. According to Flinders Petrie, the Egyptian Egyptologist, this shows how southern was the center of thought when the whole of Egypt is reckoned as the north. Some writers say that the Taharka led expeditions as far as the Strait of Gibraltar. We were not idly sitting by, brothers and sisters. We helped make the history of this part of the world. We were not all slaves. We were not all hewers of wood and drawers of water, no matter how much some people might have wanted you to be there. Another one of these Meroitic Kushite queens got into a dust up in the days of the Romans at the near the place called Aswan, and she fought the Romans. And here is her trophy, a powerful stair with its inlaid eyes, the bronze head of Augustus, found in 1910 in Meroe, in what is now called the Sudan, captures the intense glare of Rome's imperial ruler from 27 BC. Where was it found? In a temple dedicated to one of the Meroitic Kushite queens in clean sand. The Romans would have had you believe that they captured this bust and took it back to Rome. I remind you again, it was found in clean sand in Nubia many, many years later, despite the Roman report. The National Geographic magazine took note of the accomplishments of the 25th dynasty. At the height of its power, Queen Taharqa, who's mentioned in the Bible, led his queens through the crowds during a festival at the temple complex of Nubia's Jebel Barkal, its pinnacle gleaming with gold, accompanied by a sacred ship bearing an image of the god Am. Taharqa is robed in a priestly leopard skin, crowned with the WS that declares him Lord of the two lands. In this case, Nubia and Egypt. This article, and indeed its contents in the National Geographic so many years ago, was problematic in that they attempted to establish some sort of division as if these folks were not part of the Nile Valley. There was much disagreement about that. But given the rare depictions of the Kushites, the Nubians, it had its purposes. This is one of the statues of one of the Kushite kings who were thought of themselves as masters of the world. And this is at the museum in Khartoum. This is a depiction of Taharqa, a ruins of columns, along with one restored to its full height, mark the entrance port that King Taharqa added to the great temple of Amun at Karnak, one of ancient Egypt's most sacred sites. Now, another one that would follow in that dynasty, we can tell by his name. It's interesting that Africa isn't given credit for having its own Renaissance period, but that was so in the Nile Valley with the empires of Kush, particularly, okay, and Nubia. And here we have one of the motive forces for people who had enough knowledge of the history of that part of the world to restore and renew many of the past practices and artistic triumphs that their earlier progenitors had achieved. If we take a look at the Medu Neter or hieroglyphics down at the bottom, we see what has been translated as King of the North and South, and then inside the cartouche, okay, King of the North and South on the left. Uh, then we have Sarah in the middle, and then we have Shabaka inside the cartouche, the second cartouche. In the first is Ra, Nefer, Ka. again, these Africans they left a record. They left a record. Another of the 25th dynasty is part of the dream stele of King Tutankhamun. From a historical point of view, King Tutankhamun's most important monument is his so-called dream stele, which is dated to the first year of his reign, about 664 years before the birth of Christ. It was found among the ruins of the Temple of Amen at Napata, another Kushite capital. It presently is in the collection of the Egyptian Museum in Cairo. And in it, he describes in 42 horizontal registers of hieroglyphic text uh, a dream in which he saw himself holding a snake in each of his hands. On awaking, he asked the court magicians to interpret this dream and was told by them that the serpents represented the lands of the north and the south, over both of which he was to become king. Subsequently, the text continues, he was proclaimed king at Napata, succeeding his uncle Taharka. He went to the temple of Amen there and in gratitude made an offering to the god of 36 oxen, 40 measures of beer, and 100 ostrich feathers. Then Tutankhamun sailed north to seize the kingship of Egypt, which had been forcibly abandoned by his predecessor, it will be remembered. He stopped to make offerings at Abu, or Elephantine, at the first cataract, and was warmly received at the Amen-raised cult of center in Waset. His flotilla then advanced on Minifer, where he met a mixed reception of both welcome and armed resistance. Tutankhamun records on the stele that the slaughter among those who elected to do battle with his forces was so great that it could not be calculated. When he was finally taken the city, Tutankhamun went to the temple of Ptah, made offerings to Ptah Soker Sekhmet, then led his army on north to the delta, there to confront and do battle with the local chieftains, who, however, took refuge in their garrison cities. Having spent many days waiting for them to come out and fight, Tutankhamun eventually returned to Minifer. Soon, a delegation of chiefs of the eastern delta, under the leadership of one of their number named Ha-Kar, appeared at the Minifer, seeking an accommodation with the Nubian king, who in turn entertained the deputation with bread, beer, and all good things. After a few days, an agreement was reached, and the chiefs asked permission to depart to their towns to collect the gifts they had promised Tutankhamun. At this point, the narration breaks off due to damage to the stela. There are many ways in which ancient diplomacy mirrors that of modern diplomacy. So, to help you focus where we've been on our journey thus far, we have Lower Egypt, Upper Egypt, Kush, at the island of Merowe, and over to the lower right comes up our next and final kingdom, the kingdom of Axum. That the Kushites continued to fight even outside Africa. An Assyrian official may have used this seal in the course of his administration. This is King Esarhaddon's stela, standing 10.5 feet high, portrays the Assyrian monarch. As war captives, they are tethered by ropes. The left-hand captive wears the Uraeus serpent, a pharaonic symbol, on his forehead and represents either Pharaoh Taharka of Egypt or his son, Ushanahuru, both of which are mentioned in the cuneiform text engraved on the lower half of the stela. The right-hand captive is probably King Baal of Tyre. In a treaty in 676 BCE, before the Common Era, 6 years before the creation of the stela, Esarhaddon ceded door to King Baal, apparently for administrative purposes. Symbols of the Assyrian deities appear at upper right, beside Esarhaddon's head. So these people of the Nile Valley fought some of the greatest figures in the history of the world at that time. This stunning statue, which stood in the ancient kingdom of Nubia has been revealed by archaeologists as depicting the ruler Espelta, who was king of a later time. The head of the sculpture was uncovered in 2008 in modern-day Sudan, but experts have only now been able to confirm who it depicts. So they still continue to find inscriptions and sculpture speaking to the splendor of these African empires. This is an image of one of the later Candace queens. This is Queen Kalhata, mother Tanutamen, whose dream stela I read you a portion of. From her decorated burial chamber, she is shown wearing an Egyptian-like headdress. She and her son are buried in the pyramids at El Kuru in Nubia. Musawarat Asufra. Okay. Take a look, if you will, on the right-hand side of this. They still argue, is this a temple? Is it a military practice field? Why would they call it that? Take a look at the right-hand side and you will see elephants. But we know that it was not Hannibal who first introduced elephants in warfare, and that they had been used in Africa for some time earlier. Many of the floors in Musawarat Asufra are sloped, which we believe was done in order to facilitate the movement of elephants from one part of the complex to another. Here's some other examples. Canted at an angle is a floor to assist the movement of elephants. I had already mentioned to you that they had the Meroitic Kushite script, as well as being able to write in ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics. So we've seen so far the relationship of Egypt coming out of the Nile Valley, the people of the Nile Valley, primarily the Nubians and the Kushites. Part of that land today is known as Sudan, or Bilad es Sudan in Arabic, the land of the blacks. Our final country today, this evening, if you will, is Axum, the kingdom of Axum. I'll give you a minute to take a look at it to see if you can find it. But just as a hint, if you will, let's just look at center right. Just look at center right. That the achievements of Axum were known to the other leaders of the ancient world is attested in a number of places. And so there is no question about that. In, for example, the writings of the historian Procopius of Caesarea and his history of the wars. In one of his books, he writes that from the city of Axumis to the Egyptian boundaries of the Roman domain, where the city Elephantine is situated, is a journey of 30 days for an unencumbered traveler. Within that space, many nations are settled, among them the Blemmai and the Nobatae, the Nubians, who are very large nations. But the Blemmai dwell in the central portion of the country, where the Nobatae possess the territory about the river Nile. Formerly, this was not the limit of the Roman Empire, but it lay beyond there as far as one would advance in a 7 days journey. But the Roman Emperor Diocletian came there and observed that the tribute from these places was of the smallest possible account, since the land at that point is extremely narrow, for rocks rise to an exceedingly great height at no great distance from the Nile. It's spread out. Elsewhere, one of the Axumite kings, Ezana, also describes his nation in an inscription from 25 of the Christian era. Through the might of the Lord, all I took the field against. Nubia or Nubians, the people of Nubia revolted when they boasted, he will not cross over the Takazi, said the Nubia, when they did violence to the people of Mangurto and Hassa and Barya. Black Nubia waged war on the Red Nubia and a second and a third time and broke their oath without consideration, slew their neighbors and plundered their envoys and messengers, whom I sent to interrogate them, robbing them of their possessions and seizing their lances. When I went again, and they did not hear me and reviled me and made off, I took the field against them. And I armed myself with the power of the Lord of the land and fought on the Takazi at the ford of the Kemalki. And thereupon they fled and stood not still. And I pursued the fugitives 23 days, slaying them and capturing others and taking plunder from them where I came, while prisoners and plunder were brought back by my own people who marched out, while I burnt their towns, those of masonry and those of straw, seized their corn and their bronze and the dried meat and the images in their temples, and destroyed the stocks of corn and cotton. And the enemy plunged into the rivers Seda, and many perished in the water. The number I know not. And as their vessels foundered, a multitude of people, men and women, were drowned. And when I arrived at the Kasu or Kush, slaying them and taking other prisoners at the junction of the rivers Sida and Takazi, and on the day after my arrival, I dispatched into the field the troop of Mahasa and in the Damawa. These are names of other peoples. And Falha and Sarah up the Seda against the towns of masonry and straw. Their towns of masonry were called Awa, Daro, and they slew and took prisoners and threw them into the water, and they returned safe and sound after they had terrified their enemies and had conquered through the power of the Lord of the land. And I sent the troop Halin and the troop Lakin and the troop Sabarat and Falha and Sarah down the Cedar against the towns of straw of the Nova and Negues. The towns of masonry of the Kasu, which the Noba had taken, were Tabito and Fertoti, and they gathered at the territory of the Red Noba, and my people returned safe and sound after they had taken prisoners and slain others and had seized their plunder through the power of the Lord of heaven. And I erected a throne at the junction of the rivers Sida and Takasi, opposite the town of Masonry, which is on the peninsula. To know that we conquered, that we fought, that we extended our sway over various parts of our land, again, that we were not always slaves, is a powerful testament. And as we speak to Axum, mighty Axum, a power in the Red Sea, known all throughout that area, we are gratified that at least some of this rare history preserves itself when so much of our history does not. The civilization of Axum was founded on the plateau of present-day Ethiopia in the first century Christian era. Its capital city was also called Axum. The state had an agricultural economy with farmers using plows to cultivate wheat, barley, and millet. Axumites also established a successful trading colony on the Red Sea called Agilus. If you look closely, you will see it on the map that is in front of you. Okay. Where traders sold products from the African interior, such as hides and ivory, and slaves, in exchange for money or products from India, Arabia, and the Roman Empire. Agilus and Axum as a whole grew rich by taxing foreign trade and by requiring conquered lands to pay tribute. Because of their trading connections with the Roman Empire, some Axum people converted to Christianity. The religion's popularity continued to increase, helping to create a more cohesive society. In 330 of the Christian era, Christianity was decreed the official religion of Axum by then King Ezana. This is the man whose quote I read to you just a few moments ago. The Axumites defeated the Kushites in Meroe in the 340s Christian era. In the 500s, Axum expanded its territories to include modern Yemen on the Arabian Peninsula. From Arabia, Axum borrowed a script for its written language. Axum began declining around 600 of the Christian era, but it remained strong enough to counter efforts to convert Axumites to Islam in the 7th and 8th centuries. Christianity stayed the dominant religion in the area as it is in Ethiopia today. We believe that Axum comes from the Ge'ez language and means water. It means water. And the official word was shum. The official word was shum. Many rock cisterns were found near the capital, places where water was stored. The Persian scholar Mani named the 4 great kingdoms of the world: Persia, Rome, China, and the third was Axum, considered one of the great kingdoms of the world at that time. We know that during its long time in power, the king of Axum put down pirates in the Red Sea and the Erythraean Sea. It was an important trading nation in northeastern Africa, growing from the Proto-Axumite period of the 4th century to achieve prominence by the 1st century of the Christian era. It is believed by many to be the final resting place of the Ark of the Covenant and the Queen of Sheba. We now know enough about Axum as a result of investigations, to know that there were kingdoms even before Axum. And a joint Ethiopian-German project near Wurkwo in the Tigray Highlands is uncovering unprecedented finds and revealing an extraordinary picture. They had their own temples and men and women of learning. They left structures such as you see before you behind. How earlier historians missed all this, I'll leave that to you. But the early Christian kingdom of Axum was at the heart of a great maritime trading network. These Black folk were among the earliest in that part of Africa to make their own coins, to show their own rulers in all their splendor. We've covered a lot of territory this evening. But before we go, just a little bit of refresher. So here's the timeline of Axum. About 1000 BC, according to legend, Menelik I, the son of King Solomon of Israel, and Queen Makeda of Sheba, founded a dynasty in Ethiopia. That would be roughly around 930 to 800 before the Common Era. By 800, Semitic-speaking people from South Arabia crossed the Red Sea and settled in Ethiopia. From 300 BC, Greek culture begins to exert some influence in Axum. By the first year of the Christian era, Zoskalis, the earliest known king of Axum, rules. By 100 AD, the empire of Axum, modern-day Ethiopia in Africa, expands control over the Red Sea. Axum becomes the world capital about 150 years AD. By 300 AD, Coptic Christian missionaries from Egypt and Syria reach Axum. Axum conquers Kush and Nubia about 350 AD. King Azan of Axum converts to Christianity about 350 AD. 500 AD, King Caleb of Axum annexes Yemen. By 500 AD, the rise of Islam cuts Axum off from its trading partners, leading to its decline. But even here, by 900 AD, Yodit, also known as Judith, a Jewish queen, defeats the last Axumite king Del Naab and attempts to eradicate Christianity from Ethiopia. We know she was spectacularly unsuccessful in that. The Solomonic dynasty falls and is replaced by the Zagwe dynasty. You'll know them because they built the monolithic rock cut churches of Ethiopia in terms of the same size and scale of the churches in Europe. So we couldn't close out this evening without just a brief reflection on Makeda, the Queen of Sheba, one of the best known women of that ancient time, known to us in the Bible, and how it was that she traveled from the Kingdom of Sheba and from Axum, 1,250 miles to Ezion Geber and Solomon. What they don't tell you is that as those who have explored the lost royalty from the days of the Aksumite Empire, there is a story that Solomon became fascinated with Makeda. He wanted to possess her. She resisted his impulses until the last night of her visit. He played a trick on her, which required her royal strength and honor to be put to the test. And that is how he finally got into her bedchamber, if you will. The Ethiopians tell the story. You won't find this story in the Hebrew Bible, but there's so much more that comes out of Ethiopia and Axum. I want to mention a book before I close, Kebra Nagast, the Kebra Nagast. Okay, the glory of the kings. It even talks about flying wagons for this part of Africa. It's this history that we must teach. Now that we believe we found her mines, or at least some of her mines, and found gold, riches, impressively so there. So when we look in Axum, in its ruins, we look at across the Red Sea in Marib, we find evidence that she really existed. This is part of the story where essentially Solomon tricks his way into the bedchamber. What he does is he promises uh, to get her promise that she will not take anything of his out of her palace without his permission. Well, she's been entertained by Solomon, but she's not pressed. She doesn't see anything that's going to make her flout her royal dignity. What she doesn't realize is that the way the Ethiopians tell it, Solomon orders all the water taken out of the palace that they are sharing. And of course, after spicy food, good food, those of you who eaten Ethiopian food know they even have greens. So we eat whole once again. The royal throat is parched. She pads, if you can imagine, through the castle looking for water, something to quench her thirst. And if you will come with me to about the center, she finds a cup of water by his bedside, takes it without asking. He wakes up. He's probably not slept that entire night, waiting for that opportunity. With her pride on the line, she lets him in. So she leaves the land of Solomon, according to the ancient stories, pregnant. They will have a son. His name will be Menelik, which, according to some texts, means how handsome he is. And that will be the cement that holds for a time Ethiopia and or if you will, Axum, with ancient Israel. There is the final part of this story has to do with intriguers at Solomon's palace who stash among her returning luggage. Well, I'll just make it quick. The Ark of the Covenant, the container of the Ten Commandments. And so I don't care how many times you saw Indiana Jones, the Ark of the Covenant is not in a warehouse in DC, but at this very moment, in the Church of Our Lady of Zion in Ethiopia, Ethiopian priests are guarding a covered object, which they tell outsiders is the Ark of the Covenant. There are other expressions of Axumite religiosity. This is one of them. It is an obelisk, but it is also a piece dedicated to the Sabaean god Ilmuqua. One of the largest obelisks in this part of the world lies broken on the ground. In ancient world, its height was 33.3 meters and it weighed about 5 tons. Whereas the tallest known erect Egyptian obelisk is slightly under that. There are other splendors of Axum and of that period before and after these range of palaces, these grouping palaces at the base of the Simeon Mountains. You can visit. They date from the time of Queen Fasilidas from about the 15th century. You have the legend of Prester John, the mighty Christian king who fights Islam and gets a reputation in Europe for his bravery and resolve. If you look in the country for a little more recent examples of their religious fervor, we have the Church of Debri Berhan in Ethiopia, again, of more recent vintage, but nonetheless, examples of how firmly Christian Ethiopia was. They have their own great men and women, such as King Johannes IV, Abuna Salama, a religious figure of the 19th century, Ras Alula, Ethiopian general, patriot, and politician. One historian called him the greatest leader that Ethiopia had produced since the death of Emperor Theodore or Tewodros in 1868. We know that the capital of Ethiopia, Addis Ababa, which means new flower, again, is inspired by the history that I've just been sharing with you. So, my brothers and sisters, what we've done is to take a look at three kingdoms of glory and gold. There are others, of course, but these are three that are seldom put together in this fashion to tell this magnetic, entrancing story. I'd like to thank all of you for tuning in, and I will take any questions that you might have now.
Thank you again, Brother Gibbs. If anyone